Hello, good morning, afternoon, whatever it is where you are. I am Kellie Fitzgerald, and that is Lisa Van Slyke. And we are back with Sunday Talks with Kellie and Lisa. Good morning.
Good morning, Kellie.
It is morning where we are.
Yeah.
So whenever you are seeing this video is exactly when you're meant to see the video. So don't, it's timeless. It's a timeless classic. I do want to kind of let everybody know on my YouTube channel, there are a whole bunch of old recordings of the podcast that we did before, as well as the first incarnation of this one. So please scroll down through the videos. You will find them. They aren't videos, they're audio recordings, but really, really great information in some of those shows.
We had so much fun doing that. I'm so glad that we're back.
Yeah. So we're starting with boundaries.
Yes. Yes. I've been taking so I've had a complete shift lately. And I think, with the portals and all the things that are a little bit out of my scope of experience, but with the shift in the age of Aquarius, I've been doing a lot more work on the routine of listening to things in the morning that set my mind in a good frame to go through the rest of my day for abundance or, love, letting go, particularly in like frustrating situations, just breathing. And one of the trainings that I had done was on big girl boundaries. And big girl boundaries is not necessarily the size of your body, but big energy. Right. There's another phrase that people use, big D energy. We won't go into that, but it's big energy. It's opening yourself up for all of the things that you want, allowing things to come in. And it starts with putting up boundaries to protect your energy.
That's really important. The energy that we have been in with the eclipse stuff happening last month, I've had a number of clients tell me March lasted 5 years. I kind of agree with them. Kind of did. But all of that energy was about moving forward, letting go of what you've outgrown. And a lot of people don't understand when, at least me personally, when I talk about boundaries and setting boundaries, if you have people from your past that you've sort of separated from, if you have people in your past that have hurt you repeatedly and you've given them chance after chance after chance, it is not time to let them back into your life. I have one client in particular who has a boyfriend who literally tried to kill her. She let him back. That's not healthy boundaries. That's not healthy boundaries. That's really very unhealthy, detrimental to your health boundaries. It doesn't have to be that severe, though. It can be a way of thinking. If you were used to thinking, where I live, the place that's actively trying to kill me, where I live, it is really common for people to have what I call a poverty consciousness, very depressed area. Sometimes setting boundaries mean you set boundaries from yourself, from an aspect of your thinking that doesn't serve you. And if you're always thinking gloom and doom, and I know many people that were programmed from an early age to think like that.
Right. Yep.
Set a healthy boundary that you're not going to do that anymore. That takes practice, but that is also a boundary.
I know. I was about a week ago, I was on the phone with a friend, very similar to the one that you just mentioned. She was with this really great guy, but there were certain things that didn't connect, but it still was something that it was more of a self-reflection, self-work aspect. It wasn't a terrible aspect. So they're not together. And then she ended up with a man who's very similar to everything that she had in her past, that wasn't good, and I'm a repetitive, no, excuse me, let me reframe that. I used to be a repetitive pattern person. Right. And it has taken a lot of work and self-reflection and
Yeah.
digging deep to why did I keep letting that, not the same physical person, but the same like
Yeah.
aura. Why
Right.
did I keep letting that person back in? Why was this boyfriend maybe just a little bit better than the next one, but there was so many similarities? And she, she just repeated it. And it's like, I love you and I'm going to hold space for you. And that's the boundary that I have
Yeah.
set. I love
Yeah.
you. I'm holding space for you. You can come to me when you need, but until you're ready to move on, I'm not taking on your crisis
Right.
and I'm not taking on that energy.
Right.
And I love her. And she is just in a situation right now that I have to set a boundary for how much I'm going to allow
Exactly.
myself to take on.
Right.
So it's not even necessarily that you have to separate from somebody in your life, but where do you draw that line? And then you have to put a boundary on yourself. And a boundary doesn't mean you're contained and you're stuck. I think that's something that people have a hard time with a boundary as well. Is like, when you think of a boundary, you think of like a border, you think
Right.
of, this is my area, this is my containment. And that's not necessarily true. You are allowed to stretch outside of that boundary, but you have to know what your limits are so that you can work towards that level of achievement to then set the next level and the next level and the next level.
Right. Right. And what you mentioned, so this guy was a little bit better than the last one. So many people do that. And there is something to be said for taking those tiny steps.
Yes.
But until you realize what you're doing, maybe that is the best you can do. And I've had several clients in that situation. I've talked at length, and I won't go into it now, but in battered women's shelters where I've done um, speaking engagement kind of stuff. Um, that's very common. Well, the last guy
Yes.
took a knife to me, but this guy didn't. So
Right.
I'm in a better situation. Okay, you might be in a better situation from that standpoint, but it's still wounding your pride, your self-esteem, how you see the world. So you have to look at maybe this part is better. And that's good. That is progress. But you have to look at, why are you still allowing yourself
Exactly.
in that situation? Yeah.
I had one epiphany. So we all know that Lisa loves to share her own personal information. I am definitely an open book. If you go back and listen to any of our episodes, you'll absolutely see my progress along my enlightenment journey, or my evolution story. I've done a lot of self reflection and self work. I left San Antonio in 2019 to move to Dallas. I left an 8-year relationship. And I had to do a lot of healing with the things that I was responsible for in that entire situation. I
Right.
left, a young adult who wanted to stay there, some things that I had to heal from. But along the way, a lot of times we go back to the relationship that your parents had or lack of relationship that
Right.
your parents had. One of the things that I noticed in my self reflection, we moved a lot. I went from one side of the country to the other. I've lived outside of the country. I've probably lived, I think it was 7 or 11 states that I've lived in my time on this planet. And I love to travel and I love to explore and I love to adventure. But when you're young and you're only in a place for so many years and then you move because your dad's job
Yeah.
takes you to another place, I was like, wow, that's why I don't make deep connections with people that are around me,
Right.
because at a young age I had to learn that things don't always last and you have to pick up and start over again. And it hurts really bad when you have to leave those people, those friends that you
Yeah.
love. And that was mind blowing for me because I'd never made that connection. I was always like, well, maybe it's because of this situation or that situation, when it really was a lot more simple, but a lot more complex at the same time. So that's part of the healing and being able to set boundaries and expanding some of the boundaries you might have set.
I think you can always expand boundaries. Yeah, really, you can. One of the things that I had with a client, I taught a Reiki class yesterday.
Oh, nice.
One of the people, one of the students was like, I have realized that I'm giving my energy away to everyone I come across. And we collectively kind of walked through that. But the way she grew up, her dad was military and they moved all
Mhm.
over the place. And she was kind of a shy kid. So in order to have people like her, she just did whatever she felt like she could do to make people like her. And what that resulted in was her giving away a lot of her personal power, a lot of her energy. And she kind of had that epiphany yesterday in a Reiki class. And I thought, well, that's pretty cool. But that is
That
a
is really cool. Yeah.
boundary. And the one thing that I want to impress upon people with boundaries, you don't have to go back and figure out where it started. You can start now and set better boundaries now. Don't think that everyone around you is going to like the fact that you set those boundaries.
Right.
They will hate it. They will hate it. But do what's best for you. A lot of times we are taught to put others first. And there comes a point in time when you have to put yourself first. And with all the energy, all the planetary alignments, all of the sun flares, even everything in the universe is conspiring to make us all go a little weird right now. But it's all bringing home the point that we need to focus on ourselves, our own health, our own emotional health. People overlook emotional health. I know someone who works out religiously and cannot feel anything because the whole focus has been on building the body, building the body, building the body. Well, guess what? You're not just a body.
Right.
So
That's its own form of addiction.
yes.
And burying your head in the sand.
Yeah.
Yep. And numbing yourself to those emotions, because
Yeah.
when you start to dive into those emotions, they can be very powerful. They can be crippling at
Yeah.
times.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a whole other, maybe a healthier form
Other
of
show.
addiction for your
Yeah.
personal physical sense. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's still burying
Well,
whatever it is.
one of the things that I have noticed with people who have overcome addiction, which is an amazing thing, but sometimes they trade this addiction for that addiction.
Mhm.
And that's something that's really, really, really common. So
That's a totally different topic we can talk about, because I have personal experience with that one. So that might be a great topic for our next show. But
yeah,
yeah,
because
absolutely. It's still not pulling yourself into those. You said earlier, you don't have to figure it out. I hate the onion analogy. I hate it so much. Um, I prefer to think of it as like a flower with maybe like a rose where you peel back the one little petal and then there's another one. The analogy of the onion, I think it's just because it's so overdone, but it is like an onion. You peel back one little thing and maybe something else pops up and maybe something else pops up, and you can go down an entire rabbit hole
yes,
of trying to figure it out and still keeping yourself stuck even in that cycle of trying to figure it out. So
right,
there's a boundary you can set for yourself. How far am I going to dig before I allow myself to even set personal boundaries to then grow and step out of whatever it is that's holding me in place, and gently unsticking the glue from the bottom of your shoe as you now try to move forward and not keeping yourself stuck, because you can analysis paralysis. You can do
yes,
way too much and keep yourself stuck because you're in this mindset of I'm healing, this momentum of I'm healing, but you're still staying where you are because every time you find that new layer, you're not making that progress to go forward.
right.
It's this whole dynamic, right? It's like, oh,
Yeah, and the thing is, and when I tell students all the time, almost every time I have a new student, You can be healing and move forward at the same time. And
Yes.
people do get stuck in that analysis paralysis. Well, I am this way because, well, wait a minute. How was my mother? What was my father like? And it's just, don't right now heal. Set your intention to heal from your past, from your past 5 lives,
Right.
whatever it is. Um, don't drag it around with you.
Yes.
You can set it down now. You can still be healing and move forward. This same thing goes for people with relationships. How many people go from this relationship to that one, to that one, to that one, and they never give themselves time to heal from that one, 3 relationships ago. And that's
Guilty.
a big, big, big thing.
It
And
is
that
huge.
is just allow yourself to heal. Don't be in a hurry. If there is something you are supposed to do in this lifetime, you will do it. You don't have to rush through it. Take your time.
Especially if you notice, like I said, the repetitiveness of this person is
Right,
just a different variation of the person before and the person
right,
before and the person before. And it's like, find out why. Take the time to discover yourself, to discover why why you're here, what it is that you love. Why are you repeating those patterns? But don't get stuck doing that. It's like a
right.
whole, there's that small gray area, and just don't keep yourself there. I wanted to mention something because I did say you can change your boundaries. I
Mhm.
just wanted to just expand on that or explain that just a little bit before we go further, because I
Sure.
don't want it to be misconstrued. So you can set a boundary and realize that it's not a hard enough boundary, or maybe it's too hard of a boundary. So you
Right,
can flex your boundaries.
right,
As you grow and learn healing, or you start to heal and you start to learn all these things about yourself, and you have coping mechanisms to get you through, you can absolutely reset your boundaries. You can change them, you can expand them, you can shrink them. So don't feel that just because you set that boundary that it's hard, fast, and that you cannot go back and reevaluate in the future.
right,
Just like
right.
when you set a goal for, how much money you want to make or weight you want to lose or whatever, you can do that with boundaries as well. So I
Yeah,
just wanted to explain that just a little bit.
yeah. And that's a good point to make because I think people overanalyze the boundary they want to set. Well, if I do this, well, then that's going to change my whole life. And you don't move too far too fast. It's better to initially set a boundary that's more soft and then move into a more rigid boundary. Because if you go too far too fast, you're not going to succeed. That's I always laugh at students who come to me and they want to learn spirituality. They want to learn, you know, what about life? What is reality? They want to learn all these deep subjects, and it's a process, and it takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
And then they come back and they tell me, "Yeah, I'm going to college. I've enrolled in 6 classes. I'm going to graduate in 3 years." And I'm like, no, you're not. Reevaluate that. And some people have boundaries that make them go too far too fast. This kid, I'm not going to have fun until I'm 22 and out of college. Why? Yeah,
Right. Right.
so be honest with yourself. Sometimes people try to set a boundary against, well, not against, but protecting themselves from someone that was in their life a long time ago. And they're like, and I'm thinking of someone right now, who, and she told me, well, I'm just never going to speak to this person again. I'm like, you've known them since kindergarten. How is that going to happen?
Right.
And she was being too rigid. And she ended up having a complete and total emotional breakdown because she was being too rigid. So you have to watch that for yourself too.
Let's expand on that for just a minute, because you know just because you might cut somebody off or set this boundary, if you don't know why, if you're not understanding the
Right,
why,
right.
that
You have
person
to.
is going to show up in a completely different person.
Yeah.
That what you're trying to protect yourself from is going to continue to show up in your life. We've talked about this.
Yep.
I was repetitive. This is the kind of person that I dated. And I can look back at every relationship and go, oh my God, the string, the invisible string is like, it was a whole ball of yarn. It was crazy how
Yeah.
many similarity, like it was a repetitive pattern. And until I got to the point where I fixed why, now don't get stuck in analysis paralysis, but you do have to recognize some things. And shutting somebody off it can be very healthy for you. However, if you haven't figured out why, you're going to have that person continue. And sometimes it's a test from the universe.
Right.
Sometimes it's not a test from the universe. Sometimes it's you didn't learn the first time. Here you go. Here's that experience again. We need you to pick up on the stuff that we're laying down, because we're going to continue to send that person in your life if you don't figure out why that person is coming in,
Right.
or
Right.
why that energy is coming in.
Sometimes you have to look at things from different perspectives too. In my own life, my daughter's father was incredibly abusive. He nearly killed both of us. So when I got out of that violent situation, the next guy wasn't physically abusive, but he was emotionally and mentally cruel. So I just traded one type of abuse for another. And it really, when you start looking at yourself, you realize, oh, hey, yeah, same person, different clothing, and there are things that will be different. Of course, my daughter makes fun of me because in my entire life, I have never dated a man who was not left-handed or a musician. That's a bizarre
We might
type.
need to change that.
That's a bizarre type. But and they all look very differently, but left-handed musician. And I hadn't thought about that until my daughter brought it up. So sometimes you need someone else's help,
Yeah.
to help you see what you've done or what you're doing. Um, it's kind of eye-opening when you come to one of those realizations. That one floored me. I'm like, that's a weird type, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's very strange. But you have to look at, and like you said, you have to look at your why. What are you trying to get out of this relationship? A lot of people, and I used to be one of them, go into a relationship just because you don't want to be alone.
Right.
So you have to really get clear with yourself on what are you looking for.
Exactly. Yep.
Um, and then be really, really clear when you meet someone who is not what you're looking for. You're not what I'm looking for. I'll go over it this way. Because sometimes people, particularly women, and I've seen men do it too, they'll sit down and they'll do the work and they'll write out their list. This is what I'm looking for. These are the qualities I need in a person. These are, my goals. I want someone who shares some of these. And then the first person that comes along, they're like, throw that away.
Yeah.
And they repeat it. You have to have some discipline.
I'm guilty of that.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
guilty of just letting people in
Yeah.
and throwing out everything that I ever wanted, like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's gone, and I have definitely come a long way in the boundaries that I set for the energy that I allow into my life and what I'm allowing back into my life. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because I wanted to give people an idea of how to set these boundaries. Because we talk about set these boundaries for yourself, set these boundaries for yourself. But the first thing is to know what you want. I don't even think you have to know your own self. I think you just have to know what you want, and knowing yourself will evolve from knowing what you want. Sometimes it's easier to say what you don't want, but
Yes.
we need
Yeah.
to focus on what you want, because if you're focused on what you don't want, that's going to continually come into your life,
Yep.
because you're not focused on what you want, you're focused on what you don't want.
Yeah. That's sometimes people use relationships to get to know themselves. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, but that's the way it works a lot of the time. Um, and sometimes in those situations, knowing what you don't want is as important as knowing what you do want. The problem with focusing on any negative, whether it's what you don't want or what you don't want to do or anything like that, is that you are telling the universe, you send me more of this.
Exactly.
You know, so when you are broadcasting your desires to the universe, as it were, you need to be very clear, very specific. You need to really be firm in your intentions, and you need to do positive things. You know, say, I want someone who is kind. I want someone who likes to travel. I want someone, whatever it is for you. And then you have to stick to that. You can change your mind. You can add things, you can take things away, but you need to stick to what you've done. Because if you've done the work to come up with that list in the first place, it's pretty important to you. So
Right.
don't let yourself down by settling. And a lot of people do that. But that's going back to the energies that we're all feeling. That's one of the things that is shaking out. The energies, planetary alignments, all of it together is really waking people up to, oh, hey, you're the wrong person. Bye. Really, a lot of people are dying right now. A lot of people are breaking up, a lot of divorces happening, a lot of separations happening. It's all the energy of the age of Aquarius, honestly, that
Right.
is trying to get us to be truthful with ourselves. A lot of people have been in the wrong relationships for a lot of years. A lot of people have been in the wrong career for a lot of years. And all of those things are shaking up. So if you've been someone who has always been happy-go-lucky person, and all of a sudden you're thinking, why am I mad at everyone? That's the universe trying to tell you, wake up. Wake up, smell the coffee, let's get on with it. Because you have put yourself in a situation that is not good for your soul.
Right.
And a lot of people have been sleeping for a long time.
And you mentioned it's not just about that romantic relationship. It's not just about a forever partner that's going to walk by your side through the rest of your life in a way that other people don't. But this can apply to friendships. It can apply to work relationships. It can apply, you mentioned, to a career.
Yeah.
However, we have to be realistic.
Yep.
We are in this human existence at this particular point in time, and it is not a utopia. So there
Nope.
are going to be times where something comes up and you have to have, this is where your boundaries come in. But
Yep.
boundaries can also be coping mechanisms or ways that you protect your energy. Because if you keep running from things that aren't perfect, you're going to keep running and you're going to keep running and you're going to keep running. And that can be just as unsettling
Yep.
as being in a situation that's not 100% positive.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about when you are, I had a career, a job that I absolutely loved. The management around me was very toxic.
Right.
And I left a job that my team was amazing. The job itself, I loved it. And I didn't mind corporate. I just didn't like these two managers. And by the time I realized what was happening, I was already up to here
Right.
in the bad energy. It was bad. Who I was becoming was not
Right.
good. I didn't like that version of myself. I was constantly paranoid, constantly panicked. Like the conversation always went back to that with other people, always went back to that job. And I was like, this is not okay. So I chose to leave that position. I left it. And it was the greatest thing I could do. However, that's an extreme case. Sometimes you just might have a coworker that's not very pleasant, or situations where, do you really need to leave or do you need to establish a boundary? A boundary can be as simple as, I give that person 2 minutes of interaction time, and then I cut them off. And if you
Right,
even like have to go somewhere in your head to pretend like you're not in that room, that can be a boundary, or when you're finished, go and ground yourself and root yourself back into the presence and your breathing exercises to cope with that so you don't carry it with you.
right,
That can be a boundary that you set for yourself as well. It's not necessarily cutting somebody off and that's it. We're not saying that that's not something that you might need to do that. You might absolutely need to do that. But let's talk a little bit, if you don't mind,
sure.
about that type of like coping mechanisms, or evaluating when you really do need to cut sling load and run, or you can stay and do all these other perspectives, because your work here on this planet is important too. And if you really are doing something that you love, that whole running and running and running, and you're going to continue to run into that kind of situation, because it's not 100% perfect.
Right. Yeah, well, I worked in real estate for a very long time. I did mortgage loans first, and then I became a real estate broker. So I had a lot of people that I had hired, and there was this one young man, bless his heart. Yes, I'm from the South. Bless his heart. He would get in a mess, usually of his own creation, with clients. And I would see him at his desk, and he was like, repeatedly. I'm like, what are you doing? He says, leave me alone. I'm on a beach. I'm like, okay. You're on a beach being attacked by seagulls? What? But that was his coping mechanism. And in his mind, apparently, he was really on a beach. And don't underestimate the power of using your imagination to cope sometimes. If you are in a situation at work, at your family, whatever it is, and you feel yourself really getting upset, go somewhere in your head. Just do that. I've used that myself, and it does work. But I got it from him, so I can't take credit for it. It was from watching him. And it just, you have to do what works for you. Some people turn to music. Some
Hmm.
people need to go out and be in nature for a while. Nature is incredibly healing if you allow it to be.
Yeah.
You can't say, oh, I have to go out for a run. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about leave the situation you're in, go outside, sit on a bench,
Yeah.
walk to
Yeah.
your car and back, sit under a tree, talk to a squirrel. It doesn't matter what you do. It's a diversion for
Right.
your mind. It's for you to really disengage from that situation that's making you a little crazy. And if it happens every day, maybe that's your signal that it's time to make a big change. Um, I've known people who kept at the same job, and they kept going to the same job, and they were getting sicker and sicker and sicker and sicker. And finally, they ended up in the hospital.
Mm.
And that was somebody I know well. And it was, you didn't see this coming? Remember all those conversations that we had about how miserable you were at work, and now you're sick, and it will do that to you. Forcing yourself to be in a very toxic situation, no matter what it is, will eventually make you sick. Because
Right.
the universe is going, hey, we made it uncomfortable. That was supposed to be your clue. And that's the thing about the universe. They will give you messages. They'll give you messages. They'll give you messages. And if you keep ignoring them, you'll end up hurt.
Right.
And that's
Right.
just kind of the way it works. So train yourself to ask those questions. Is today a particularly upsetting day? Is tomorrow going to be better? You know where you work. You know where you live. Is
Right.
this a constant thing, or is this a one-off? Everybody has bad days, but it's when those bad
Exactly.
days turn into bad months and bad years that you really need to, maybe take a harder look.
Well, and then you can even take a harder look at yourself.
Yeah.
I had a career or a job, excuse me, that brought me here, and COVID happened and that job was no longer. And then I took another job, and then I took another job. Then I took another job, and then there was one other job. That's a lot of jobs that,
Yeah.
for now, a lot of them were just a temporary thing, just to have some money coming in until I found something that was really what aligned with me that I wanted to do. And like I said, that last one that I had, really, I loved it, but the whole management aspect was toxic. I left that job, and then I found one that I thought that I was going to be okay with. It was not, it was not what I was put here to do at all.
Right.
It was not my jam. But there was an overlying theme. Let's call it a theme of, I would come home and I would talk about this bad job for hours every day,
Yeah.
every day, every day. And somebody finally said to me, I've noticed a pattern. Have you ever thought maybe it's you?
Sometimes it is you. And that's okay. It's perfectly fine. But yeah, you have to look at that. I've known several people that unfortunately have taken telemarketing jobs, one after another, after another, after another. And they're like, by the time they come to me, they're like, I don't understand what's happening. I'm like, okay, deep breath.
Yeah.
Why do you keep doing that to yourself? You didn't learn the first time, you didn't like doing that. You have to do it 4 more
Yes.
times, just to be sure. And we all do that in some area of our life. We do. I'm of the opinion that kind of everybody has an addiction of some sort in their life. I've been accused of being addicted to animals. I can't deny that, I really can't.
Seems like a good addiction.
But I think everybody has something that they really should stop doing to themselves, and they just ignore it and go away. So the big thing is, be honest with yourself. Ask yourself questions when you find yourself upset. Am I upset the first time over this situation, or is this something that I do all the time? For me, it's when something isn't fair. I've had to really, rein myself in because, well, I'm a double Libra, so everything has to be fair. But it got to the point where I was giving myself a headache over other people's stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, no, 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 I know better than this. Why do I do this to myself? And I still start going down that road. I just stop myself now.
Yeah.
It's like, you can care from a distance. You can care about what happens to someone that seems so unjust from a distance.
Right.
And
Right.
not take it on. We do that sometimes, especially people who are empathic. I can see an abused animal 7 countries away, and I'll be right there, and it just, it,
Yeah, let's not do that again.
it's really something to watch.
Mhm.
We need to pay more attention to our own habits and our own
Yeah.
tendencies. It's enlightening if you do. I mean, it really is. I was like, wow, I'm getting upset over something that happened in a place I will probably never be in my life. What's up with that? Don't beat yourself up, but acknowledge it and say, oh, okay,
Right.
I need to change that a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
Progress. Definitely.
And that helps you figure out what you want. It helps you figure out what boundaries you need to set. And because, again, if you don't have them, you're going to repeat. And maybe the reason that you're repeating is because it's supposed to be your life's work and you're supposed to get paid for it. who knows? It can turn into a positive thing,
Yeah.
but you need to really start with what you want, or start with what you don't want, and then just do the opposite of that. I don't want a person who's manipulative. So what's the opposite of manipulative? Because that's what you want. You
Yeah.
want somebody who is kind and loving in any kind of relationship. You want a job that brings you joy. But what does that mean? Sometimes it's not, sometimes you have to dig a little bit deeper. And I think that's another topic for a different show. We can
Yeah.
totally talk about something, a little bit deeper than that. But, you have to start somewhere,
Mhm.
and setting a boundary, knowing it is not set in stone, it is not forever. It can be moved. You can move the goalpost. You can, shift it one way or another. Um, Give yourself that flexibility, and maybe it won't be so daunting or so suffocating, if you will, because it's like sometimes that hard line can, until you're prepared, like cutting somebody out of your life, for example, until you're prepared to really be able to do that, until you baby step your way to where it just kind of naturally dissolves, it might be, you don't have to say, I need to cut them out and just cut them off completely, because that might not feel good to you. It might be that I'm only going to spend so much time with them, or I'm only going to talk to them once a week. And then you can expand that to once a month. And then, eventually it might dissolve. But just start somewhere.
Yeah, the thing too about cutting people out of your life is you have to be really clear on why you're doing it. And you have to also be really clear on the fact that people change.
Right.
And you can cut someone out of your life for a period of time. And then when you reconnect, you realize how different they are. That's different. That's not a toxic person. That is someone who was going through something that you could not go along for the ride on.
Right.
And that's where people get really. I talked to someone yesterday who has had a grudge with her sister for 54 years. They just stopped talking 54 years ago. And I asked what I felt like was the obvious question. What did she do? She doesn't remember.
Oh my word.
You've
Oh,
cut your sister out of your life and you don't know why. So be careful when you're cutting people out. Make sure you have your why. And
right.
it's not only when people aren't in your life anymore, it's also what you do for work, it's what you do for entertainment, it's all of those things. Make sure you're really clear on your why. Don't go 54 years without talking.
There
Whoa.
there's a phrase that says, I am not the version of the person you remember that
Right.
I am. I'm not that person anymore. Well, the same applies for people that have been in our life. They're not that version either.
Mm-mm.
And we're not, let me just say this 100%, we are not saying let everybody back in your life.
No.
And second of all, if you're in danger, if you're at risk to your personal or mental state, please get out as soon as you can. We are not saying you have to make exceptions for that. We're
Yeah.
not saying you have to let these people back in your life. It is okay to 100% cut somebody off and not let them back.
Right.
So
It is. Yeah.
please just make sure that that's something that we want listeners to understand, that that is not what we're saying, because there are people in my life who will never be allowed back
Yeah.
in.
No, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm okay with that. And
Yeah.
I'm not sure how they feel. If we ever happen to cross paths for whatever reason, I will be cordial, but there's no, like, we're not picking that back up. But I know my boundaries with them. I know my boundaries just
Yep.
on a regular personal level. So I know also how to protect myself if I do run into somebody like that, from my past. But let's just make sure that we we
Yeah.
make that clear
Yeah.
that if
Some
you
of the
need to
people
cut
from my past,
somebody
I
out,
might
please
cross the
do.
street to avoid.
Yeah, yep,
Yeah.
yep. It is
It,
okay
yeah.
to cut somebody out completely, and you don't have to feel guilty. However, if you expect people to to look at you today in a different light because you're not that same person, there is a reciprocity. It's a law of the universe is reciprocity, and that's something that they're not that same person either. They might still have a lot of the same tendencies or character traits, but yeah, it's a reciprocity thing. If you want them to treat you differently or not to, judge you based on who you were in the past, that courtesy should be extended.
Yeah.
Maybe, depending on the situation,
Well,
depending on
it
the
depends,
analysis that you've done.
it depends on how people have grown. Some people in our lives are not meant to be there the whole time.
Right.
They're meant to come in when we're walking the same path, and then we come to an intersection and they go one way and we go the other. But if someone you've parted ways with in the past all of a sudden is back on that same road, it doesn't mean you have to say, no, 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 I'm done with you, bye.
Right.
It just depends on how they've grown and how you've grown, because we're
Exactly.
always growing and we're always changing, or we should
Yep.
be.
Exactly. Yep. And there's that analysis of your boundaries and where
Yeah.
you've come and the things that you want. So,
Yeah, be clear about that.
exactly.
So I think this is just about where
I
we
think
need
it's
to stop.
perfect.
Yeah. So be clear on what you want, guys. Don't telegraph things to the universe that you don't want. And I think a lot of people do that.
Yep.
So thanks so much for watching. Please like the video, share it, subscribe to the channel. All of those things really do help.
Yes, they do.
We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.